Hello, Asha.
Hi, Marcella.
How are you? So here we are on on Facebook Live to have our conversation. I'm honored and grateful that you are here with me, and you are the one of the creators and the CEO of Giving Tuesday, and something that has become larger than life in so many ways. So I would like to ask you to start, Asha, how did it all start? What was the kicking point? Why? How?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me, Marcella. I'm also honored and grateful. Um, Back in 2012, seems like a lifetime ago, and also just yesterday in so many ways, I was working at the 92nd Street Y with your lovely and amazing wife, and also with the person who would become the Y's executive director, Henry Timms. And we were doing a lot of work trying to reimagine what the word community means in the 21st century. So the Y is a community and cultural center, and for obvious reasons, it has very long served a very local population. Extending out to the five boroughs and Westchester and so forth. But we were really trying to think beyond that, right? So what does community mean when you can literally reach anyone, right? When you can create something good and have it go anywhere you want, right? Or places that you didn't even imagine, and have people engage with your mission and with your work. And if the Jewish values that the Y was founded in, included repairing the world, right? And that was part of our mission statement. Then we really wanted to think about how to encompass more people in what we were doing. And Karina's work with the Shababa Network was the perfect example of the kind of things that we were trying to do, right? Building networks, really thinking about scale, really thinking about exponential growth. We started a few different programs. One that seemed very innovative at the time was called the Social Good Summit. It was a conference about sort of the nexus between technology and global development. And it was an amazing project, very long running. It's still going on. Um, and then somewhere in there, we started Giving Tuesday. I think we also started another program first called 92Y American Conversation, which was really an attempt to bring the political dialogue to a higher and broader level, and to use technology to try to bring educational yet accessible content out to people. I mean, now that doesn't seem innovative at all, right? We were creating videos and putting them online. But then it was actually quite a new thing for the Y to be doing. And one morning, Henry came into work, and I was busy prepping for that year's Social Good Summit. And he said, I had this great idea, Black Friday, Cyber Monday, Giving Tuesday. And I said, that's amazing. I love it. Like the simplest idea in the world, and yet really powerful, right? Why shouldn't there be a day for giving after 2 days of consuming, and after Thanksgiving, right? So consuming a lot of food, then consuming a lot of retail. Why shouldn't there be a day that's sort of about giving back? And that year we launched Giving Tuesday in an incredibly short period of time. I think that conversation happened in late summer, and the first Giving Tuesday was in early December. So that might not be fast for maybe the tech world or the startup world, but for the nonprofit world, it's very fast, right? More commonly, what you'd find is, oh, I had a good idea, let's have 7 months of committee meetings about my good idea, and lots and lots and lots of input. And then, too often what you end up with is sort of a mishmash of, people's input and feedback and approvals processes. And sometimes it lacks the clarity of the original idea. And I think that's one thing that we really wanted to avoid. And so we really launched it right away, and just tried to learn from it being out in the world. And I'm so glad we did that, because it's not that we didn't make missteps, but we did learn from it being out in the world. All the best things we learned were things that were learned from the people who were actually engaging with it. And it's so funny to look back at it now and see how US focused it was at that point, and how nonprofit focused it was at that point, and how much both of those things have changed now.
Okay, so wait a minute. It looks like we are having. Do you see me?
Yeah. Do you see me?
No, sadly, we got
Really?
disconnected.
Hold on.
Let's wait for a moment. Okay, let's wait for a
Continue.
moment.
I think you continue like this.
Are we on Facebook too?
We'll post it.
Okay, I think we'll continue like this, and
Okay.
then we'll go to Facebook. There was some issues there. Technology is a blessing and sometimes becomes
Indeed.
complicated, you know?
Yes.
So from there,
Yeah.
how is it that became global? This is an idea that happens in the Upper East Side of Manhattan. Two people very creative and then think about this. Okay, we started boom, boom, boom. From there to have somebody in Ghana doing it, it's there's a big leap. So how come?
Yeah, I mean, in this day and age, and I guess even in 2012, you just can't keep a good idea or unfortunately a bad idea from crossing borders, right? Borders just don't exist online for the most part. And I have to tell you, I feel so sheepish when I look back and see how we positioned it that first year. And I'm so humbled by the fact that it has grown so global and that I've learned so much from the way that different countries engage, not just with the day or the movement of Giving Tuesday, but with generosity, right? With generosity itself, I have learned so much. And it's really simple. I mean, those first couple of years, we were contacted by organizations in the UK and in Canada, I think then Brazil and then Russia, by people saying, can we, we'd love to lead this in our country. And we were like, this is amazing. I mean, we never for a second thought,
Now you didn't think about it. So
we didn't, it
was
was
an
definitely not a
afterthought,
strategy, right? It was definitely not a strategy, but we also, the minute it happened, realized what an amazing thing it was.
of course.
And realized, and I don't think we actually started to put a lot of attention and resource toward it until it really started escalating past then. We basically like started a WhatsApp group for those leaders. We were a really small group, 8 people, 10 people, tried to help them get their Giving Tuesday movements off the ground. All those countries have since done, incredible things, and the same people in all of those countries are still leading it 9 years later. And then it just started to scale exponentially, right? So that by 2016, we had 24 countries. By 2017, we had almost 50. And it has grown kind of at that pace. And now we're at almost 75 countries.
Wow.
So that, and they're on every continent. They're of every possible, GDP size and population and religion. And it's remarkable. And we've kept that WhatsApp group. All of those leaders are together on a WhatsApp group. And I'll tell you that
Very active.
they are so active. They talk all day. They talk every single day of the year. And they really give the lie to the misperception that Giving Tuesday is really just one day, because it's not. It's like, we say it's like a wedding anniversary, right? It has one day of big celebration, but it's something you work on every single day. And that's what it is. The day in December or late November is the big day of celebration, but it is something that we all around the world work on every single day. And it's just so incredible to have all of those different perspectives brought to the, generosity economy, all of the different stories they have, and all
We'll
the
talk
different
about that
skills they
in
have.
a moment, generosity economy. But before that, you in the organization, do you have to give any type of support? Are you still the mothership, or this is something that is completely snowballed and everybody contributes to Giving Tuesday idea?
Yeah, this question alone could be a full hour-long conversation, because it's so fascinating to me, the different structures that different movements take. Some with more structure, some with no structure, some completely decentralized, some not. We definitely have a structure. We call ourselves our Giving Tuesday, the organization. We call ourselves the nucleus of the global movement, not the center, not the head, not the flagship, because nucleus is the part of a cell that holds within it, right, the DNA of all of the other parts. And so we try to support, to guide, to help, to facilitate, and most of all, to learn from all of those other countries. And the truth is, if we disappeared right now, they would still have each other, right? But we do try to be the connective tissue as much as possible. And, you know, whatever funding we manage to get, a lot of that is used to support the global leaders.
Mhm. And the core value is the same everywhere?
Yes, but, or and, yes, and. Yes, it is. But it is remarkable how different the interpretations and the manifestations of the words generosity and giving are in different countries. And that's partially a language issue, right? Like it's fascinating. Some of our leaders are actually writing an article right now about the way that giving and generosity translate in different languages. And part of it is that, right? And part of it is simply the way that generosity traditions, the way that generosity as a value has been embedded in people's lives, in their communities, in their families from the time that they were growing up, right? It finds such incredibly broad expression. And that's really the value of them being so interconnected and us being so interconnected, is learning about all those different expressions, because they are not all the same. And we had a fascinating WhatsApp conversation at one point about what is your, I just sort of asked, what's your definition of generosity? And for the most part, everyone had a different answer.
Wow.
And for some, it was, this kind of old, Maimonides, give, but don't brag about it, right? And for some, it's giving without expecting anything in return. And for some, it's an expression of solidarity, that we're actually all equal, that we all have something that we need, and that we all have something that we have to give. And that's honestly, that's sort of one of my favorite interpretations of giving, because I think it's a particularly American thing, one, to look at giving in a hierarchical way, right? So people who have more give to people who have less, and that's become the common sort of definition of charity. And I think the other thing that is uniquely American is our capitalist take on generosity and giving, right? It is a default in the US to think of generosity and automatically think of money. And there's just no way that you can take that out of a cultural context, right? In the States, we see philanthropy and most other things through the lens of money. And that is just not true everywhere.
So it's about volunteerism, it's about giving of yourself, it's about giving time, it's about kindness. Well, that's what you're saying.
Yes, to me, generosity is about giving anything that you have that is an asset that you have to give, right? So if that's kindness, if that's mentorship, if that's time, if that's empathy, if that's money, if that's volunteer hours, all of those things are giving, right? And for me, the big end goal of all of it is to have generosity as a value be the driver for the actions of our daily lives, right? So it's not, I'm going to work, I'm spending time with my family, and then I'm going to volunteer, right? All my generosity is packed into the 2 hours a week that I volunteer, right? You wouldn't think of love in that way. So if generosity is sort of woven into the way you move through the world, then life is different, and it's different for you, and it's different for everyone around you, that you affect people in such an incredibly positive and generative way. And by generative, I mean, if you're generous to someone else in that way, then they're going to pass that on because it feels so great.
So that's what you mean by radical generosity? I mean, I'm
No.
interested in the word radical. Why it's radical? What do you mean by that?
Radical generosity is a little different, and I think probably people would define it in different ways. The way that I would define radical generosity is a couple different things. Radical generosity is feeling that if others don't have, or if others are suffering, that's as intolerable to you as if you didn't have or you were suffering, right? So not throwing a couple dollars at someone who's suffering and moving on with your life, but feeling like that's not okay, right? It's not okay to patch up the wound temporarily. It's not okay to throw a Band-Aid on something. It's intolerable that it's even happening. And I think the thing that I see in the States in particular, really, I have to say, is this sort of tolerance of the fact that people suffer so much, right? That we sort of assume that, you know, food pantries will step in and feed the hungry, rather than asking ourselves, why in the world do we tolerate anyone in this country being hungry in the first place, right? And to me, that is starting to think in a frame of radical generosity. And just, you don't have to be radical, right? But if you think of generosity in that way, you start to look at the world around you in a different way. And that leads to the other part of what radical generosity certainly means to me, which is that we need to completely rebuild, right, what we see around us. We don't just need to put something pretty on top of it. We need to rebuild systems. We need to rebuild structures. And we need to think about the way that we can do that together in a way of, you know, radical generosity, radical empathy, right? Radical kindness. Those are things that we don't see right now, no matter how much we donate, right? I wouldn't say that we are, I would say that I'm inspired every day by the generosity of human beings in this country and around the world, 100%. But I think as a fabric of the United States is not one that is woven together with threads of generosity. It's not considered like an essential thing to have and to do as a practice. And then there's a fascinating concept about movements in general, which is that the thing that movements share is that they occupy a place of radical imagination, which is such an incredibly beautiful and powerful concept to me. What it means is that when you engage in a movement, right, whatever it is, whether it's Giving Tuesday, whether it's Black Lives Matter, whether it's Me Too, whether it's Occupy, whether it's a hate-filled movement, right, a hate-fueled movement, what you're doing is building a shared landscape where you imagine the world as you wish to see it. And that's one of the things, not the only thing certainly, but one of the things that defines a movement to me is that you're not just making something viral, right? You're actually trying to completely reimagine something. And I think, you know, right now we have the opportunity to do that, you know, like never before, although it was certainly something that we were thinking about for a long time before that.
It's interesting because when you were talking about the examples, you know, I was thinking about the social justice, different social justice movements, some of them that you mentioned. So, so in which way Giving Tuesday is a social justice movement? You know, in which way you are connected with any social justice movement that strives for change in the fabric of the society, whether it's, you know, against racism or equal pay, or, you know, choose any of the million illness that we have. In the fact that, you know, more than 40 million people in America at this moment don't have medical insurance, it's appalling. So in which way this is different? Because it sounds different.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I think that's such a smart question, and I think about it all the time. And I think it's different in a couple of ways. First of all, I think all social justice movements are connected or should be connected, right? We won't solve the climate crisis, right, without solving racism and misogyny. We won't solve racism or misogyny without addressing climate crisis, right? We won't, like, and on and on and on for, you know, all the different movements that are happening around the world. People choose to focus rightly on the thing that really drives them, the thing that they're passionate about in that moment. But none of these movements exist in a vacuum, right? They all have to be addressed. They all affect each other, right? The climate crisis, you know, affects the poor and people of color disproportionately, right? They're incredibly connected. So in that way, I think all movements are connected, and I think Giving Tuesday is absolutely part of that landscape. But what sets Giving Tuesday apart is that it is not a movement that was created to solve a specific problem. And it's not a movement that was created actually in opposition to anything. You know, even in the very beginning, people would say it's the anti-Cyber Monday and Black Friday movement, right? We would say, no, it's not. It's the and, right? Like, great, Black Friday, Cyber Monday, do your thing. But there's also this other thing that we can think about. So we're really just not in opposition to anything, except, I guess, when I think about it, the opposite of generosity, which there are a lot of definitions, right, of the opposite of generosity. And that was also a conversation among our network, greed and selfishness, and isolationism, right, tyranny. These are all, the opposite of generosity. So I guess that you could say we were against those things, but really we think of ourselves as being pro generosity, right? And pro all the things that generosity leads to. So generosity by itself is great, right? But I think of generosity as having a sort of starburst effect, right? That generosity leads to an explosion of all kinds of other incredibly positive things, right? It leads to more empathy. It leads to more civic participation. It leads to more kindness. It leads to more civic connection and more human connection. Generosity is known for having positive health effects and mental effects, right? There's all of these wonderful things that happen as a follow-on to acts of generosity that are all instrumental in creating that thread, right, that gets woven through your daily life instead of generosity being put in an hour a week box. So I think they all fit very nicely together, but that's probably what sets Giving Tuesday apart.
Yeah. In many ways, it is what you are against is entitlement, because entitlement is poison to the soul, and greed is based in entitlement.
Yes.
I deserve it. It's me, narcissism. So it's a very kind way, since it's about giving, it's a very kind way to do a critique of the consumerism society. Because when we cultivate, I'm a mindfulness teacher, facilitator, I'm a psychologist, a rabbi, but I do mindfulness work. And in my mindfulness work, generosity is crucial. Gratitude, generosity is crucial, because without that, we cannot do even self-criticism.
Right.
Because why I'm going to criticize myself? I deserve everything, So it could look like a narcissistic view of oneself, but no, it's a view that embraces generosity and generosity of spirit for the sake of kindness, for the sake of gratitude. And when we cultivate that gratitude and generosity, more things happen. I want to take this to the present moment. Asha, we are in unprecedented time. We never lived anything like this. Some people who are old, they say this seems like the world wars, when the world was into something of pain, destruction. There is no bombs here, thank God, but they are dead. We have our deaths, and people are dying, right and left, and countries that you didn't expect that they're going to do great, like Vietnam, so one of the forefront of doing things right. And United States, you imagine, United States is going to, control this. It's really bad. So in the context of COVID-19, what does it mean, your work? How your work is being reshaped?
Yeah, I mean, I can honestly say that I've loved Giving Tuesday every single day that I've had the honor of working on it, but it has never felt as urgent as it does in the present moment. I think it has exposed so many things, right? It has exposed so many things and so many inequities, but it has also exposed where there are gaps in generosity, right? Where generosity was clearly not a value behind the creation of whatever system or structure we see so badly failing so many people right now. And so it is being ripped apart, right? Just absolutely shredded. And, the United States, for example, which is just breaking my heart in every direction every single day, prides itself on being an incredibly generous culture. And that's because, we have the highest amount of donations in the world. And it's just exposing that that's one tiny part of what generosity is. Generosity also drives policy, right? It also drives the way we interact with our neighbors, with our communities, and with those around us. And we see that happening, all over the place in the United States, but not because it is embedded in the way we think about our responsibility to other people. In so many other countries that we've been exposed to and learned from, right? I would say African countries probably top, Latin American countries for sure. There are deeply ingrained generosity traditions that the United States just doesn't have at all, right? Just traditions that have evolved in very natural and spontaneous ways that have been created to make sure that no one in that community suffers or falls through the cracks. And we just don't have those. And I don't know if it's because we are so young as a country, or it's because we're the country that people came to from everywhere else and brought so many different traditions that nothing quite had the chance to take hold. I'm not sure. Maybe it's because we are so hyper capitalist, and because money and the economic machine always take precedence over anything else. I don't know. But I think now's the moment that we need to really reimagine that, and that we have an incredible opportunity if we do that, right? This really could be the moment that, historians 100 years from now look back and say, this was when the people said, no more, right? We won't live within structures and systems that cause this kind of suffering for people. And we won't get there without radical generosity, right? We won't get there just through policy. We won't get there, just through a sense of doing the right thing, or just through a new deal, right? Where we're trying to create new jobs and create a new economic engine. Certainly, I think that would be part of it. But there has to be something more. There has to be something deeper underneath it. And, the real meaning of the word philanthropy is love of humanity. And it has not grown to mean that in our imaginations, right? It has grown to mean very wealthy people who give away lots of money primarily. And the word philanthropy, even as relates to money, has nothing to do with how much you're capable of giving, right? So one of our earliest goals with Giving Tuesday was, everyone's a philanthropist, right? And then over the years, we stopped using the word philanthropy entirely because the connection in people's minds between, right, billionaires or millionaires and philanthropy is just too strong. And so we just stopped using philanthropy and just have said giving for years. But that is the real definition of philanthropy. And it's a beautiful definition, right? Because, our lives are driven by values, right? And I have to believe that we are born with those values, or the ability to develop them, right? In the same way that we're born with, innate musical talent, but it doesn't matter unless we practice. We're born with those values, and it is the decisions that we make every day, every minute, that depend on how strong those values get, right? How strong our practice is around them. Love is a great thing, right? We all love love, and we all feel love, but we mostly feel love for our family, right? And our close friends. If you count the number of people that you truly love, that's not going to be hundreds of people, right? You're not going to really love hundreds of people. But generosity is love turned outward, beyond your family and beyond your friends and out into the world. And so as a value, it's not better than love, right? None of us could do without love, but it does have the capacity to affect far more people as you go through the course of your life. And that meaning of philanthropy, love for humanity, is very specific, right? It's not love, filial love, right? It's not love for your close friends. It is love for the people you've never met. It's love for the people you might viciously disagree with, right? It's wanting something better for everyone. And it's feeling like, again, solidarity. I have your back today because I know I'll need you tomorrow, and placing everyone on that same level playing field. So anyway, I think if we really felt that from a grassroots level right now, if we really strengthen that and insist on it being the foundation of everything that we do in rebuilding everything that's being ruined right now, that's our only hope, right? That's really our only choice right now.
There is an interesting paradox that I feel in what you're saying, based on in the culture where I come from. I come from Latin America, from Argentina, worked in Chile. So I had to fundraise in those countries, and the same in the United States.
Sure.
And this relates to the first part of what you were saying relating to money. in the Latin American countries, you have a lot of I have your back, the amigo, the friend. I'm
Yeah.
here, the deep sense of loyalty. I'm there for you. And people move mountains for somebody else. There is something about that. At the same time, to raise some money there is not so easy. And I remember when I came to the States and people were sending checks in honor of this person, in honor of that person, and the fact that it's tax deductible, that I didn't understand exactly what it meant. And I said, wow, so this is engraved in the culture. The fact that regarding money, at least, regarding giving money, it's engraved in the culture. So I'm sensing like a paradox into two definitions of what giving could be or could mean. Do you understand what I'm saying
I
regarding?
do. Yeah, I do. I don't think it's a paradox. I think both of those things are true. I think, last year on Giving Tuesday, almost $2 billion was donated in the United States. That's a remarkable amount
That's
of money.
amazing.
It's absolutely extraordinary. And the average gift size was just over $100, right? So I think it's, we all need those bigger gifts, and we appreciate our bigger philanthropists, and Giving Tuesday itself, relies on funding, and hefty amounts of it. I think it's about bringing in the other side of the coin, the grassroots, right? The grassroots giving that is not celebrated nearly as much. And the fact that, yes, it is an incredibly strong tradition in the United States to donate, but we need to also embed other forms of giving and other forms of generosity, and not feel like I gave my tithe essentially, right? And now I can kind of go on with my life. A really interesting thing, and I think a wonderful thing about giving, is that it's a strong part of literally every religion that I've managed to study, giving within. I mean, as you know, right, it's an incredibly strong part of Jewish values, incredibly strong part of Christian values as well, in a different way, I would say. And a lot of giving in the United States is religious giving, and it has long been that way. And then I think there's also maybe a sense of, I hope this doesn't sound cynical, a sense of, okay, I've taken care of myself and my own, and now I can do what I think I should do for others.
Mm.
It's not that that's a bad thing, but I think in some sense it makes us not dig deeper into why we need to give that money in the first place, right? And what other things are we taking part in? What other structures are actually causing the problems that we're then giving money to? And one thing I love about Giving Tuesday as well is that it has made giving a more spontaneous and everyday part of the conversation. If you imagine the kind of vision of giving in my parents' generation, let's say, right? You'd have, mom or dad sitting down at the desk on December 31st, right? And writing a check to their chosen nonprofit, generally the same one year after year after year, right? For their tax deduction. So in that vision, there's nothing wrong with that vision. It's great that person, right, whoever they are, is giving money to something that's trying to do good work in the world. Full stop. And it also means that that generosity is the very last thing that person is thinking about for the year, right? It's the least important thing of the year. It's like, okay, now I can do my generosity and get it off my table. And it's because there's a payoff, right? I get my tax deduction for it. And one thing I've learned traveling around is that giving is so strong, regardless of whether there's a tax break or not.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying I'm not in favor of there being a tax break, or that I am necessarily, but I do think it does a disservice to us as human beings to imply that we're doing it because we get this tax deduction, right?
Yeah, and I think this, takes me to two things. One is September 11, and then is what is happening with first responders now around the world. People are going outside of the balconies to clap and to sing and to say thank you, to put thank you notes. And I remember September 11, New York felt different. And I
Yes.
remember crying in the streets. As a rabbi, I was a part of the rescue team of September 11, among many others, to help, families. And after one night, with my colleague, with Rolly, we left there. We were completely white, with a mask and the whole thing. And we entered hot and crusty with a coffee shop and for a coffee, and people started to clap. And we turned around thinking that, I don't know, Michael Jackson came in. I don't know, we didn't realize, and we realized was for us. I said, no, please, but the sense of, and I remember the lines in the Red Cross giving blood, and the people now with the desire to give thanks to the nurses, to the hospital workers, to the ambulance drivers. So and then, of course, New York came back to the old thing.
Right.
So, but those moments, I think Asha tells us about what you're saying, that that's part of the human core, that we are expecting, why we are waiting for that to come out.
Yes.
To be able to be generous, to be kind, to take care of each other. And the majority of people out there in the streets on 9/11, they're not giving money, they're giving blood, they're giving their time, they are giving food to the first responders.
Yeah.
So that's what you're talking about with I think with radical generosity, to be able
It
to
is
be in
very
touch with
much.
them.
Very much. And I would say that, I lived through 9/11 obviously as well in New York, and the US can pull together in a crisis, right? You just see these incredible flare-ups of generosity from so many corners, obviously not all corners, right? But from so many places and so many different kinds of communities, and such an outpouring of generosity. What I see in that is exactly what you're saying. There is this fundamental need to give. There just aren't enough opportunities for it, right? There's plenty of opportunities to donate to a nonprofit, yes, but there are fewer opportunities in our daily lives where we feel generosity needs to drive this moment. In a crisis during 9/11 or during COVID, we do feel that, right? We really, that urge becomes very, very, very strong, but we need to feel that all the time. We need to feel our responsibility toward each other and the joy it can bring, right?
Mhm.
That it's not a drag or a trouble. It's incredibly rewarding to be generous to other people.
Yeah.
And, and when COVID is over, if there were a vaccine tomorrow and we all forget about this time in a month, I would hope that we would still retain that sense of feeling such responsibility for each other and such responsibility for our elderly neighbors, and all of these, mutual aid networks that sprung up, in the early days of the pandemic are such a perfect example. They're amazing, right? You post what you need, you post what you have, you post if you know of somebody who's in need of something. But there are people in need all the time, right? Every day, forever. There are people in need, and we can always be thinking in that way. We can always be thinking of how we can be helping.
Thank you. Thank you. I think this is a great way to end an amazing conversation. Is there any final message? We're going to post this in this Facebook. Is there any final message for the people who are going to be listening to you?
Let's see. See if you can do something generous every day for 7 days. And Giving Tuesday's on December 1st this year. And we love when people get involved with the movement. So please get in touch with us or visit our website and see all of the different ideas for being generous and helping at this time. And we actually have a weekly generosity text. We send out a weekly generosity idea by text if people want to sign up for it on the site.
Thank you. Thank you, Asha. You've been very generous and very kind, as always. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Marcelo.
Thank you, and to be continued.
To be continued, I hope. Bye.
Bye-bye.